people want to know how you stood there for 12 hours plus, almost 13 hours.
Well, it's not easy. My feet were hurting by the end of the day. You can't leave the floor and you can't sit down, so you can't use the restroom or do anything like that.
And you were told that to your staff, or did the parliamentarians say?
It just sort of is the rule that's kind of known, and the staff knows the rules better a lot of times than the senators do, so they gave me the advice on what we could do, and there's staff in there that works for the Republican side and the Democrat side. They inform you what you can and can't do. Then you have to ask a question. People can ask a question to you, but there's a certain protocol or you lose the floor, and the Democrats will leave someone down there to see if you make a mistake on the floor to take it back from you. And it doesn't happen very often because, one, it's hard to get floor and it's hard to get recognized when it's not a designated time. Most of the time the floor is controlled by the leadership. This just happened to be a time that it wasn't.
And you snuck up on both leaders, right? I mean, is that fair to say? Did they know you were going to do this?
No. And in fact, we didn't know we were going to do it that day. We had gotten a lot of information because it's an issue we're really interested in, that we really think it should be easy for the president to sort of say, you know what, Americans not engaged in combat in America cannot be targeted for killing.
And again, I'm going to get to the substance in one second, but one of the things that was so fascinating about this was how organic it was, and how it sort of took on a life of its own. I'm not even sure if you realized that because you were there on the internet. I was watching you for the first 2-3 hours. You were alone, and then suddenly you had some of your more conservative compatriots like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee come, and then by midnight you had a lot of people there. There was a hashtag Stand with Rand, and more people were tweeting, even the RNC chair, get down there and help him. Were you surprised?
Well, it is sort of a fascinating phenomenon, and when you're on the floor, you're not allowed to use electronics, and I also didn't have time because I had to keep talking. If you actually stop for more than about a minute, they can say you're no longer speaking, you don't hold the floor, so you have to keep going. But I didn't have time to look at my phone, which you're not supposed to do anyway. But then when Senator Cruz came to the floor and started reading those tweets, I kind of got a feeling that maybe this was bigger than, all we knew is we believed in an issue, we wanted to talk about it, and that it's important that the president realize that he's restrained by the Constitution also. So we got talking about something we were interested in, and you never know whether people are watching or not, but you want the issue to be big because we want the president to respond. And what we're hearing from the White House this morning is they may respond to my question. And if we do, we're willing to let the Brennan nomination go forward.
And talk more about that. You said you heard from the White House who, and what did they say?
I don't actually have the name of who, but somebody on my staff and other Republican staff are talking to the White House, and I'm hoping there'll be a response. I've never really doubted that maybe the president and I are on the same page, but some things need to be explicit, and the one thing that I think needs to be explicit is that this drone killing or targeting program, that you can't target Americans who aren't engaged in combat. We've never questioned that if you have a grenade launcher on your back and you're attacking the Capitol, you can be killed without due process. I'm not against that. What I'm against is that if they think maybe for my political beliefs that I might be an anti-government person and I'm having dinner with somebody, or maybe I email a cousin of mine who lives in the Middle East, that's not enough to be killed. That's enough to say, let's make an accusation and you have a trial. That's the way our country works. I think the president believes in that, but he needs to be explicit, and we've asked the Attorney General, and they haven't been explicit. They've just talked about exceptions to the rule. We want to know what the rule is. Are you going to kill Americans in America who are not engaged in combat?
Right, because they have argued that they have given you an answer, but perhaps it's not the answer that you've been looking for. So when you say explicit, how explicit, what's the answer you're looking for?
The very specific question we're asking is, does the president believe he has the authority to kill Americans who are not engaged in combat in America with targeted drone strikes? And I think the answer is no, but they haven't given us that answer. They've given us things like if planes are attacking the Twin Towers. Well, we all believe that the military, Republican and Democrat, that the military or anyone can repulse an active attack by an individual or a military or a plane or anything, whether it's an American or not. What we're talking about is the drone program overseas now often targets people who aren't engaged in combat. They're sitting at home in their house. And that's another debate for another day, but that's the kind of standard we're using overseas. And the president won't answer. He says, well, I might use a standard that inside the country different than outside, which alarms us because it means he's already thinking of a standard for killing Americans in the U.S.
One of the things about this issue is that it is made for strange bedfellows. You had a Democrat, Ron Wyden, standing with you, but you also don't have all conservatives with you. The Wall Street Journal, which is known as a very prominent conservative editorial page, really took after you this morning, saying that you had great theater, but you're just wrong on the issue because that the U.S. government cannot randomly target American citizens on U.S. soil or anywhere else. What it can do under the laws of war is target an enemy combatant anywhere at any time, including U.S. soil.
The Wall Street Journal is right on a lot of issues, and they're wrong on this issue. The problem is if I call you an enemy combatant, how do we know if you are or aren't? That's just me calling you and accusing you of a crime. Should there be enough power by any politician, Republican or Democrat, to just say, you're an enemy combatant and a Hellfire missile drops on your house? That's what they're saying. And I, with every fiber of my body, believe that that is unjust and unconstitutional, that if you're an American on our soil, people can't just accuse you and call you a name. They're just assuming that the person calling your name is omniscient and knows you were guilty of that. But the way I see it is, look, we have a lot of Arab Americans who live in Dearborn, Michigan. And I think the vast majority, if not almost all of them, are good American people. But let's say they have a cousin in the Middle East and they email them. Let's say somebody thinks their cousin in the Middle East is a terrorist. Well, for goodness sakes, would you just drop bombs on people in Dearborn and say, well, we think he's associated with terrorism, he's an enemy combatant? Well, that's a lot different than someone with a grenade launcher on their shoulder attacking someone. That's an enemy combatant. But the people that they've been targeting overseas aren't always using weapons. So I don't want that kind of standard in our country. Imminent threat, no problem. If you're attacking, but it has to be an imminent threat. And this is part of the problem. The president said imminent doesn't have to mean immediate. That's very troublesome to me. If someone's attacking the Capitol with a grenade launcher, that's an imminent threat. If someone's carrying a bomb into a building and getting ready to set it off, that's it. If someone's assembling a bomb, that could be an imminent threat too. But if you're sitting in a cafe and you're emailing a friend in the Middle East, that's not an imminent threat. And the other thing in our country is, if you're not involved actively in combat, wouldn't you rather capture them and ask them questions about who they are talking to and investigate it? But really it's about the belief that justice, innocence or guilt should be determined by a jury of your peers. That's what we fought for. That's what our soldiers are fighting for. And to me, it's disappointing to think that they would be overseas risking their lives to fight for something that we're willing to give up on so easily.
You talked for a very long time, and you had a lot of things to say yesterday into last night. One of the things that you said was, you were talking about 9/11, and you were using the example of the hijackers. And you said that you thought maybe the hijackers were citizens. Did you mean U.S. citizens?
There were 19 hijackers. A lot of them were here on student visas. I'm almost positive, I've read somewhere, and it's hard to be authoritative, but I'm not positive. But I thought I read somewhere that some of them had voting cards. And to have a voting card, you would have to be a citizen. And I had never read that they were citizens, but I read somewhere the other day, and so that I may have misspoke, but I thought I had read somewhere that some of them had voting cards. And I don't know how they would have voting cards if they weren't citizens.
Let me ask more of the personal questions here. We talked a little bit about the fact that you were eating on TV, eating in front of the senators. You ended it saying effectively that nature was calling. Right. Is that why you ended it? Because you had to go? Yeah. When you got to go, you got to go?
Yeah, 12 hours is a long time not to go to the restroom. And so, yeah, it does limit you. And I asked, how did Strom Thurmond go 24 hours? And apparently there are stories that he was bending the rules a little bit.
Bending the rules how?
By leaving the floor briefly leaving the floor.
I'm glad that was your answer. But did you go in, when you went in at 11:47 a.m., did you say, I'm going to be here until after midnight? What was your plan?
As I drove up in the morning, I was with a staff member, and I said, if we have a chance, why don't we maybe try to capture the floor to make our point? We had no plan, and I had the wrong shoes on. My feet were hurting the whole day, and we really didn't plan it out. We had thought about that this issue is important enough that we would like to do it sometime, but the floor is controlled by the leadership, and it's not often left open where someone can sort of capture the floor and begin to speak. So one of the reasons filibusters don't occur is because they carefully guard the floor from letting it happen, and it was left unguarded, so I decided to speak.
I did notice that you had water there, and I don't know if it was intentional.
You
were trying not to drink it. That was intentional?
I decided to drink very little water and have no caffeine.
Well, you clearly didn't need it. What happened when you left? Did you go have a big meal?
It was almost 2 in the morning. I went home, but it was nice. There were a lot of supporters. My staff stayed through the evening. A lot of them were in the gallery. A lot of other staff was. And really one of the most complimentary things I found was about 15 members from the U.S. House of Representatives came over. I've never seen that happen before. It energized me, and a lot of them said that it energized the movement of people who really believe strongly in the Constitution.
And when you were on the floor, you were talking about the fact that Strom Thurmond has had the longest filibuster in history, but you didn't have in the back of your mind, oh, I'm going to try to be competitive and try to beat that?
No, not really. And I really didn't know how long it would go on when I started. In some ways, I had said early on, if the president will respond, I'll stop now. And that's really all we've been looking for is a clarification. And we really think the president may not be too far away from us on this, but we're troubled by the fact that it's been hard to get the information, and that when Senator Cruz asked Eric Holder questions, he had to ask him repeatedly, is it constitutional or not? Are you saying you have the authority? And he kept using words like, well, it's not appropriate. And the president used words like, I don't intend to. But see, he did this on indefinite detention too. The president signed into a law that says you can detain a citizen of the United States without a trial. Now he's arguing you can kill an American citizen without a trial, and it's like, just saying you don't intend to, that I'm a good person, I'm not questioning his motives, but the reason we have laws is someday we may get somebody who won't respect and will use that law for bad purposes.
And let's go back to where we started, to saying that giving us some news, you have heard from the White House, and you think that they might give you an answer that could satisfy you.
I'm very hopeful, and I've said I will get out of the way and let them vote, compress the votes, and we won't have to stay here till Saturday. All I'm looking for is clarification, and I think Eric Holder's comments in the committee under a little bit of duress, but I think those comments were getting closer to our position, but I also don't think they're going to have to change their position. I just want them to clarify and make sure that Americans know that when you're sitting in a cafe or sitting in a restaurant, you will not be targeted by the American government.